G'day everyone and welcome to video 4.2.1. Thank you to those of you who've reached out and asked if there are going to be videos coming for this area of study. There certainly are, and we'll hopefully get them all out in a timely manner for those of you who are obviously in the run home, our last area of study for the year. Webcam issue, so no buff head in the corner today, but we will continue the tradition of starting with a quote. And I love this one. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So, no matter how talented you are, if you don't want to actually put in, then you're going to get rolled by the people who do. So, hard work always beats talent. And the harder you work, the more opportunities and the more reward you'll get. And that's particularly true in the run home in year 12. So, what question are we going to be able to answer today? So, we are looking at this key knowledge here, reasons for law reform. So, why do we reform the law? And our key skill is going to be to explain that. So, it's pretty straightforward, just show our understanding of these reasons. So, ultimately, we're going to be able to answer why do we need to change the law? And using examples as in the skill, what are some examples of this? So, straight into it, reasons for law reform. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 4 reasons. Okay, so 4. Theoretically, you probably want to know minimum 3, but you might get some case study questions in section B, for example, that ask you, what are 2 reasons why the law changed in this case or in this example. And if you've only learnt 2 and they don't really apply, you're going to find it hard then to get the marks available. So you really need to be looking at least 3 and maybe even remembering all 4 so you can be agile and adaptable in section B questions. Look, outside of these 4 reasons as well, I just do want to point out that sometimes the law just changes because it's bad, and that is, theoretically a reason why the law needs to change. It's not operating the way it's meant to be. It's a bad law. And that often fits in with the idea of, it doesn't meet communities' values or technologies change. But essentially, often the law needs to change just because it is not working. Like it lacks clarity, for example. So that can be a loose reason that you could also use in an answer. Hey, the law needs to change because this is an example of a bad law. But if we want to get in a little bit deeper than that, we need to be prepared to talk more specifically to things like changing values, technological advancements, etc. So our first specific reason is this idea of one reason why the law needs to change is because of the changing values of, very annoying when it does that, sorry, changing values of, I'm going to have a mare here, changing values of society or of the community. Now, what does this actually mean? Like, if that's your STEM sentence, one reason for law reform is changing values in the community or changing values of society. How do you then explain that? Well, you talk about the fact that society's changed dramatically over the last 100 years, technology, obviously, which we'll get to in a moment, but just the views of people, how tolerant we are, how accepting we are of people's differences, how accepting we are of people doing what they want versus, thinking of others. It's safe to say that society today is dramatically different to what society was 100 years ago. And as a result, the law needs to change to match the views of the community in line with that stuff we did last area of study around uh, Parliament and the factors that affect Parliament's ability to make law, right? Parliament needs to represent the people, and if the views and values of the people have changed, then Parliament needs to change the law. Greatest example of this, and this one comes out in lots of answers on exams, is same-sex marriage. So the Marriage Amendment Act that made it possible for same-sex marriages to be legal in Australia. That's a great example of the views of people changing on same-sex couples. So 40, 50 years ago, even probably more recent, views in the community were that, same sex couples weren't appropriate, that there was something wrong with that. Whereas these days, it's very much viewed as something that is normal and certainly not a problem in society. So the fact that it's okay now or we change the laws so it's okay for or legal for those people to get married is an example of the values of the community changing. The other most common one that comes up on answers is technological advancements. And this one's just a really clear one around the idea that as technology develops, we need to regulate that technology. Things like smartphones, computers, all those sorts of things, but also like transportation technology. So moving away from horses and carriages to cars and to planes and things like that. We can't just leave these spaces unregulated. We need to make rules and laws around how these things operate, particularly as sometimes they can cause new threats to individuals. So a good example of this is an amendment to the Crimes Act about 20 years ago now, but it added the concept of cyber stalking to the Crimes Act. So the Crimes Act used to obviously have stalking as an offence, but stalking used to be something you had to do physically. Obviously, with the birth of the internet and even these days with smartphones and things like that, stalking something and harassment particularly is something that is more commonly occurring now through the use of carriage devices like phones. So it's relentless phone calls, text messages, contacting people through social media, trying to track their whereabouts. And as a result, the law didn't cover that. Stalking was very much an in-person thing, so the law had to be amended because advances in technology had created new threats. So that's a good example for technological advancements. Um, in line with that idea of new threats is the idea that we need to change the law. So one reason for law reform is protection of the community. And this is the idea that these days we really expect the legal system to protect us. So, you know, primarily the legal system used to be this idea of, oh, yeah, like people can kind of do what they want and we'll put a few things in to regulate behavior, but otherwise, it's disputes between individuals. We'll figure that out through a civil system. Whereas these days, we really fundamentally expect that the primary purpose of particularly criminal law is to protect us from harm, criminalize certain behavior so that we can feel safe in the community. And therefore, as new risks uh, arise, that could be linked to technology but might not be, we then need to change the law to keep people safe. Great example here is the Tobacco Act. So lots and lots of changes to the Tobacco Act over the years. Smoking used to be a bit of a free for all, and then slowly over time, you limit who can smoke. You say people can't smoke indoors anymore. Um, so on and so forth until we get this amendment in 2016 because we're starting to really understand the impact of passive smoking, so secondhand smoking. We had laws prior to this that banned smoking in cars that had children in them, for example. And this amendment in 2016 extended the location of smoking bans around outdoor dining areas. So not only could you not smoke inside at a restaurant anymore, because you used to be able to, and I'm sure many of you wouldn't know that or remember that. I certainly do. It extended it to outdoor dining areas, so you couldn't even sit outside at a restaurant and smoke. Considering there's other diners around, you would have to actually go to a designated smoking area. Even outdoor drinking areas, so say in pubs and stuff like that, had to be designated as no food areas, and there had to be boundaries around and certain fence heights around smoking. So this is all centered around protecting the community from secondhand smoke. So a recent amendment. Finally, in line with the changing values one reason for law reform is around generating changing values, and sometimes it's up to politicians and parliament to try and be a little bit more aspirational and try and drive social change. It could be around issues of social equality, equal opportunity, getting rid of discrimination, etc. And a great example of this is Victoria's Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act. It's a great example in the sense of every piece of legislation that passes Victorian Parliament now has to have a statement attached to it about whether it complies with this act or not. Um, so therefore, hopefully they all do. But if a piece of Victorian legislation does not comply with the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, it doesn't stop it passing. Nothing actually happens. They just have to publicly say that it doesn't comply. But it is, in a way, a little bit aspirational, a little bit around, hey, we're going to try and make laws that are in line with our Human Rights and Responsibilities Acts, because that's all about tolerance and social equality and things like that. So we're trying to generate changing values through what we do as a parliament. The key skill here, like I said, explain. So just, again, can't harp on this enough. Explain is show understanding. So you put enough detail in, do more than just name it, show you understand what that means. So what do we mean by changing values? Show that understanding, extend on that point around the development of society, the increase in tolerance, etc. And key here is using examples, and that's why in here I've very clearly included an example for each of the four reasons. This might be a question you get, describe one reason why a law may need to change. It might have even been a question you got on a past exam, and we can see that students did really, really well on this. 2 marks was awarded for a full description. Identification, so just naming a reason, only got you 1 mark. An example was a good way to provide a more comprehensive description. Many students use changing values. That's why we use it as one of the reasons we give you, and talked about marriage laws around that. And lots of other students also use changes in technology, protection of the community, and clarifying laws were also used. So we've basically, the reasons I've given you today are those that are taken straight out of the examination reports as valid reasons to use. Here's a link you can go to, just what is law reform, why do laws need to change, just might provide some further reading. But yeah, fundamentally, if someone comes up to you on the street, like we always say, and says, why do we need to change the law all the time? Why can't we just leave it as it is? And maybe it's generally that's a view of older people in the community. Like, why can't we just keep things the way they are? Why do we have to change things? You can really clearly go, hey, well, yeah, society's different. The values of the community have changed, and Parliament's a representative body. And, sometimes new harms arise and we need to protect people. Hopefully, you can explain those in good detail. You can throw a couple of examples in, and therefore, you can very clearly tick off reasons for law reform as a content point that you know. Looking forward to getting into Unit 4.2 as we go. As always, welcome to leave feedback.